The air was thick that night, heavy with moisture, carrying the faint scent of rain-soaked asphalt. The city was alive but dark, buzzing with its secrets in the shadowed alleys and flickering street lamps. Alicia Monroe, a 32-year-old freelance artist, was walking home, her boots echoing in the lonely stretch of streets. She always took this route, quieter, off the main drag. Where the street vendors had tonight was different. She had felt it before she saw anything, that gut instinct that prickles the back of your neck. "Well, buddy, easy, buddy," she muttered softly. He gave a low, quiet growl, his deep chest vibrating under her touch. That's when she heard it. Footsteps. More than one pair. Slow, deliberate, and matching her pace. A quick glance over her shoulder confirmed what her instincts were screaming. 3 men, just a block behind H-racists. She could tell by their smug arrogance. The ones who lurked in the dark parts of a city like Essie. She kept walking but picked up the pace. "Come on, buddy," she whispered, but her voice was steady. Alicia knew that fear fed predators. She wasn't about to let that happen. Suddenly, a voice echoed behind her. "Well, well, look what we have here." Alicia stopped dead, not out of fear, but out of strategy. Buddy froze with her, muscles taut, waiting for her command. The men approached, stepping into the pale wash of a single street lamp. 3 of them, slightly older, late 30s maybe, faces marked with the kind of sneering bravado that came from lives lived without consequence. The leader, wearing a dirty denim jacket, smirked as his friends flanked her. "What's a lady like you doing out here alone?" he asked, pretending at politeness. His voice was greasy, slathered with malice. "I'm not alone," Alicia said, lifting her chin. Her hand tightened on Buddy's leash. The German shepherd stood like a sentinel, his sharp gaze never leaving the men. The second man, tall with an uneven buzz cut, laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Oh, I see you brought your little pet. What's that gonna do?" Alicia didn't move, didn't blink. "Leave. Now." The leader tilted his head, feigning surprise. "Hear that, boys? She thinks she's tough. You think your dog's gonna save you?" That's when Alicia made her first move, a deliberate step backward. It wasn't fear, it was strategy. She needed to get Buddy positioned. The man in the denim jacket lunged forward suddenly, reaching for her arm, fast, like a snake strike. He never saw Buddy move. The German shepherd exploded off the ground like a missile, straight into the man's chest. A snarl ripped through the air, a terrifying primal sound that echoed down the street. The man hit the pavement hard, screaming as Buddy's teeth locked onto his forearm. Alicia snapped her fingers twice. "Buddy, hold." The dog obeyed instantly, though his growl didn't stop, vibrating through the fallen man's bones. The second man took a step back, eyes wide. "What the hell?" Alicia's voice was ice. "I said leave. I won't say it again." For a long second, the 2 men stared, caught somewhere between fury and fear. The leader writhed on the ground, his face pale as Buddy's teeth hovered just inches from his throat. "Get him off me! Get this mud off me!" he cried, panic breaking through his bravado. Alicia crouched beside him, her face calm, controlled. "You picked the wrong person tonight, and the wrong dog." She snapped her fingers again. Buddy stepped back, teeth releasing his grip, though his stance stayed defensive. The man gasped and scrambled backward, clutching his bleeding arm. "You're gonna regret this," the buzz-cut man hissed. His voice shook, but Alicia could still hear the anger beneath it. She stood tall, her silhouette framed by the dim street lamp. "No, I think you're the ones who'll regret it." The 3 men staggered away, faces pale, threats thrown over their shoulders as they disappeared back into the darkness. Alicia stayed perfectly still until they were gone. Completely gone. Only then did she kneel beside Buddy, running her hand gently down his back. The German shepherd leaned into her touch, his tail wagging once, just barely. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice breaking. Her eyes stung as she looked at him, her silent protector. You knew before I did, didn't you? Buddy licked her hand in response. Alicia rose and started walking again, Buddy back at her side. This time, her steps didn't echo with loneliness. They carried purpose. She wasn't a victim. Not tonight. As they turned the corner toward home, Alicia spoke softly into the night air. Thank you, Buddy. I owe you everything. And Buddy, loyal as ever, trotted beside her, unstoppable, unshakable. Hers. The morning sunlight filtered through Alicia's thin curtains, casting fractured patterns across the hardwood floor. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring blankly at her hands. Buddy lay at her feet, his large form curled protectively near her, ears twitching every so often, as if still on guard. Alicia hadn't slept much. The events of the previous night replayed in her mind like a broken record. The sneering faces, the violent lunge, and Buddy's terrifying but beautiful precision. Her heart swelled with gratitude as she looked down at him. He was more than a pet. He was her guardian, her family. She leaned forward, running her hand along his strong back. You're something else, you know that? Buddy's tail thumped lightly against the floor in response. For the briefest moment, she smiled. Then it faded, replaced by unease. Those men had been dangerous, and they hadn't seemed the type to let humiliation slide. She could still hear the buzz-cut man's voice, dripping with venom. You're gonna regret this. The words clung to her skin, a warning she couldn't ignore. The sound of her phone buzzing on the nightstand pulled her from her thoughts. Alicia glanced at the screen. Her best friend, Mia. With a sigh, she answered, Hey. You sound awful, Mia said immediately, her tone sharp with concern. What happened? Alicia hesitated. Mia was her rock, the person who had been by her side through every heartbreak and triumph. But even so, Alicia hated worrying her. I had a situation last night, she admitted finally. Ran into some guys on my way home. There was a pause. Ran into? Mia repeated, her voice low. What does that mean, Alicia? They tried to corner me, she said, forcing the words out before she lost her nerve. But Buddy took care of it. He scared them off. A sharp inhale echoed through the phone. Oh my God, are you okay? Did they hurt you? No, Alicia said softly. Buddy didn't let them get that far. She glanced down at him again, and for the first time, noticed the faint pink streak of dried blood near his mouth. Her chest tightened. They were just angry men. They won't forget it, though. I could see it on their faces. Mia's voice turned serious. You need to report this. Go to the police. Alicia shook her head instinctively, even though Mia couldn't see her. And say what? 3 men followed me, but my dog attacked them before they could do anything. There's no proof, no witnesses, and let's be honest, Mia, I'm a black woman. You think the police are going to jump to my defense? That doesn't mean you shouldn't try, Mia countered firmly. Alicia rubbed her temples. She appreciated Mia's concern, but she knew how the system worked. I'll be fine. Buddy's here, and I'll be more careful. I promise. You'd better be, Mia said after a long pause. You're coming to dinner tonight. I don't want you sitting alone in that apartment. And bring Buddy. I want to spoil him. Alicia smiled faintly. He'll like that. After hanging up, she stood and walked to the kitchen, Buddy trailing behind her. The apartment was small but cozy, mismatched furniture, walls covered in her artwork, and plants scattered across every available surface. It was her sanctuary, or at least it used to be. Now it felt fragile, unsafe. As she brewed coffee, a sudden noise outside caught her attention. A car door slamming. Alicia froze, her body tensing instinctively. She moved to the window and carefully pulled back the curtain. A rusted black pickup truck sat idling across the street, its engine rumbling low and steady. The same truck she had seen last night when those men walked away. Her heart dropped. She could barely make out the figures inside, but there were at least 2 of them. Watching. Waiting. Buddy growled low in his throat, pacing near her legs as if he could sense her unease. Alicia let the curtain fall back into place, her mind racing. So they were serious about coming back. She spent the day on edge, every sound outside sending adrenaline through her veins. She double-checked the locks, pulled the curtains shut, and kept Buddy close. By late afternoon, she had managed to calm herself enough to get ready for dinner at Mia's. She couldn't let fear control her life. That's what they wanted, to see her small, afraid. "Come on, boy," she said, clipping Buddy's leash onto his collar. "Let's go somewhere safe for a while." They walked briskly to Mia's brownstone, just a few blocks away. The evening air was cooler now, the streets busy with people returning home from work. Alicia kept scanning her surroundings, but the truck was nowhere to be seen. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Mia greeted her with a tight hug at the door. "You look like you're ready to fight someone," she said, half joking. "I'm just on edge," Alicia replied as she stepped inside. Buddy immediately wagged his tail, sniffing around before flopping onto Mia's rug like he owned the place. Mia laughed and crouched down to scratch behind his ears. "You're the real hero, huh? Saving our girl." As the evening wore on, Alicia tried to relax. Mia had a way of making her feel safe, even when the world outside felt like it was closing in. They talked, laughed, and ate too much pasta. For a few hours, it felt like everything was normal again. But as Alicia and Buddy walked home later that night, the darkness felt heavier than usual. The streets were quieter, the shadows deeper. Alicia couldn't stop herself from looking over her shoulder every few steps. She turned onto her street and stopped cold. The black pickup truck was there, parked just down the block, its headlights off. 3 figures leaned against it, barely visible in the dim glow of the street lamp. They weren't hiding. They wanted her to see them. Buddy's growl rumbled immediately, his body tense and ready. Alicia's pulse thundered in her ears as she gripped the leash tighter. She thought about turning back. But no, this was her home. She wasn't going to run. She took a step forward, then another, her chin lifted in defiance. One of the men pushed off the truck and started toward her. Alicia recognized him, the leader from last night, his arm now wrapped in a makeshift bandage. "Looks like you didn't learn your lesson," he called, his voice carrying through the still air. Alicia didn't answer. She kept walking, her focus sharp, her heart hammering. "You're gonna pay for what you did," the man snarled as he closed the distance. "You think you and your dog can scare us? We don't forget." Buddy barked, sharp and loud, the sound cutting through the night like a warning shot. The man flinched, hesitating just a moment too long. Alicia took that opportunity to move faster, her keys gripped between her knuckles as a makeshift weapon. "Come on, Buddy," she whispered. "We'll handle this, one way or another." The men didn't follow immediately, but their threats echoed behind her like a storm rolling in. They weren't done, not by a long shot, and as Alicia climbed the steps to her apartment, she knew this wasn't over. They were testing her resolve, but they underestimated her, and they underestimated Buddy. The morning brought no comfort. Alicia sat at her small kitchen table, hands wrapped tightly around a cup of lukewarm coffee she had forgotten to drink. Outside, the city buzzed on as if nothing had changed, but her world felt smaller now, closer, suffocating. The black pickup truck had vanished sometime during the night, but its presence lingered in her mind like a shadow she couldn't shake. Buddy sat at her feet, alert, his ears flicking at every small sound. He hadn't relaxed either. Her phone buzzed. Mia again. Alicia let it ring for a moment before answering, forcing herself to sound casual. "Morning. Did you sleep at all?" Mia's tone was sharp, the concern evident. "Enough," Alicia lied. "Alicia, don't do this. Don't brush me off. I know something's still happening." Alicia hesitated, glancing down at Buddy. "They came back," she admitted finally. "That truck was parked outside my building last night. I saw them." Mia let out a low curse. "You need to get out of there. It's not safe." I can't just leave, Mia. Where am I going to go? My lease isn't up for months, and I can't afford to break it. This is my home. They're targeting you, Mia nearly shouted. It's only going to get worse, and you know it. Alicia leaned back in her chair, staring at the cracks on her ceiling. She hated that Mia was right, hated the helplessness creeping into her life. But running didn't feel right. She wasn't the one who needed to back down. I'll figure something out, she said quietly. Promise me you'll be careful, Mia replied, her voice softening. I promise. After the call ended, Alicia stood and began moving through her apartment with purpose, double-checking every lock, every window. She didn't have the luxury of pretending things were normal anymore. If they wanted a fight, she would be ready. That afternoon, she made a stop at the hardware store. The aisles were lined with items that suddenly seemed less like tools and more like lifelines: deadbolts, motion-activated lights, pepper spray. Alicia grabbed what she needed, her movements quick and decisive. Buddy stayed close to her side, drawing the attention of a few customers. An older woman even smiled warmly at her. Such a handsome dog, the woman said, bending slightly to offer Buddy a gentle pat on the head. He looks like a real protector. Alicia smiled faintly. He is. As she walked back to her apartment, with the bag of supplies slung over her shoulder, Alicia felt the tension in her muscles slowly releasing. Taking action, even small steps, felt like reclaiming some control. She spent the next few hours installing the extra locks and securing her windows. The sound of drilling and hammering echoed through the otherwise quiet apartment, and by the time she finished, the sun had begun to dip below the skyline. She stood back, wiping her hands on her jeans as Buddy watched her curiously. There, she muttered. Let's see them try now. But as if the universe were mocking her, a sharp knock rattled her front door. Alicia froze, every muscle in her body locking up. Buddy was already on his feet, his growl deep and menacing. For a moment Alicia didn't move. Who knocks at this hour? The knock came again, louder this time. Who is it? She called, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. Silence. Alicia's hand hovered near the lock, but she didn't undo it. I said, "Who's there?" Finally, a voice replied, low and gravelly. Delivery. Alicia's heart skipped. Delivery. She hadn't ordered anything. She glanced through the peephole, but the hallway was dim, the figure standing too close to the door for her to see clearly. Buddy barked sharply, his claws scraping against the floor. You've got the wrong apartment, Alicia said firmly. There was a pause, and then the voice spoke again, this time quieter, almost mocking. You're Alicia Monroe, aren't you? Her blood ran cold. Get away from my door, she warned. The figure outside chuckled softly, the sound curling through the cracks like smoke. See you around. Alicia didn't move until she heard footsteps retreating down the hallway, followed by the distant slam of the building's front door. She stayed frozen for another minute, her breath coming in shallow bursts. Buddy pressed against her side, sensing her distress. Good boy, she whispered, running a shaky hand through his fur. She spent the rest of the night in her living room, curled on the couch with Buddy lying protectively in front of her. Every creak of the building made her jump, every passing car sent her heart into her throat. At some point she dozed off, her dreams restless and full of faceless men chasing her through endless dark streets. When she woke the next morning, sunlight was streaming through the cracks in the curtains, and Buddy was standing near the front door, staring at something on the floor. Alicia sat up slowly, her body aching from the awkward position she'd slept in. What is it, boy? She murmured, standing and following his gaze. Her breath caught in her throat. Someone had slipped an envelope under her door. She stared at it for a long moment before finally reaching down and picking it up. Her hands trembled as she turned it over, finding no name, no return address, just her. Alicia Monroe. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the words typed in bold block letters. "This is just the beginning." Her vision blurred as fear flooded her veins. She stumbled back, clutching the paper in her shaking hands. Buddy barked sharply, snapping her back to reality. "Okay," she whispered to herself. "Okay, you're fine. We're fine." But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. Whoever these men were, they were making good on their threats. And this was only the warning. Alicia couldn't stop staring at the paper. The words, "This is just the beginning," were seared into her mind like a burn that wouldn't heal. She stood frozen in her living room, the letter crumpled in her trembling hands, while Buddy paced nervously at her feet. Every ounce of calm she'd clung to was unraveling. These men weren't just angry, they were persistent, calculated, and cruel. The sun had barely risen, but Alicia didn't care about time anymore. She grabbed her phone and dialed Mia's number. Mia answered after the second ring, her voice groggy. "Hey, what's going on? Are you okay?" "They left a note," Alicia said, her voice tight. "Under my door. They know where I live, Mia. They're not stopping." "What?" Mia's voice sharpened, all traces of sleep gone. "What did it say?" Alicia swallowed hard. "It said, 'This is just the beginning.'" There was silence on the line, a heavy pause that made Alicia's heart thud louder. Then Mia's voice came through, low and serious. "That's it. You're coming here. I don't care about your lease. I don't care about anything. Pack a bag, grab Buddy, and get out of there." "I can't just—" "Yes, you can," Mia interrupted, her tone brooking no argument. "You don't owe that apartment or those men anything. Your safety comes first." Alicia's chest heaved as she tried to steady her breath. She opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. Mia was right. Staying here was like standing in the middle of an open field during a lightning storm. Eventually, something would strike. "I'll come," Alicia whispered, "but just for a couple of days until I figure out what to do." "Good," Mia said firmly. "Pack now. Call me when you're on the way." Alicia hung up and dropped the note onto the table as if it were toxic. Buddy, ever aware of her distress, sat next to her, pressing his head against her hip. "Don't worry, boy," she whispered, scratching behind his ears. "We'll get out of here." She moved through the apartment quickly, stuffing essentials into a duffel bag. Clothes, toiletries, her laptop, and the envelope with the note. She couldn't leave it behind, not now that it felt like evidence. By the time she zipped the bag shut, her hands were steadier, but her heart still pounded like a war drum. Buddy stood by the door, tail wagging faintly, as if he sensed they were going somewhere safer. Alicia clipped his leash on and hoisted the bag over her shoulder before cracking the door open. The hallway was empty. She stepped out cautiously, her eyes darting in every direction. The creaky elevator was too risky, so she took the stairs, moving quickly but quietly, Buddy trotting beside her. Every shadow felt alive, every noise amplified in her ears. When she finally stepped out onto the street, the crisp morning air hit her like a splash of cold water. But her relief didn't last long. Across the street, parked at the curb, sat the black pickup truck. Alicia froze, her fingers tightening around Buddy's leash. The windows were tinted, but she could feel their eyes on her, watching, waiting. Her breath caught in her throat. She thought about going back inside, but she knew that would only make things worse. They wanted her to run. They wanted her afraid. Not this time. Alicia squared her shoulders and stepped off the curb, crossing the street toward her car, which was parked a few spots down. She refused to look at the truck. She refused to let them see her fear. Buddy walked beside her, his ears flattened and body tense, a silent warning to anyone watching. When she reached her car, she unlocked it quickly and let Buddy hop into the back seat. As she slid into the driver's seat, she stole a glance at the truck. The engine roared to life, but it didn't move. The intimidation was deliberate, a silent message that followed her like a shadow. Alicia slammed her door shut, started her car, and drove away without looking back. Her knuckles were white against the steering wheel, her heart thundering in her chest. The city streets blurred past her as she focused on one thing: getting to Mia's. Duff. Mia's brownstone felt like a fortress when Alicia finally arrived. The neighborhood was quiet, tree-lined, and far removed from the chaos that had followed her for days. Mia opened the door before Alicia had even knocked, pulling her inside with a hug so tight it knocked the wind out of her. "Thank God you're here," Mia murmured. "You look awful." "Thanks," Alicia muttered, managing a weak smile. Buddy trotted in behind her, sniffing the air before flopping onto Mia's living room rug like he belonged there. Mia stepped back, studying Alicia with sharp eyes. "Did you see them again?" Alicia hesitated, then nodded. "They were parked outside my building this morning. Watching me." Mia's face darkened. "That's it. You're staying here until we figure this out. You're not going back there alone." "I can't hide forever," Alicia muttered, sinking onto the couch. "No, but you can be smart about this," Mia shot back. "You need to call the police." Alicia shook her head. "It won't help. Even if they take me seriously, what are they going to do? Patrol my block 24/7? Arrest them for sitting in a truck?" Mia sighed and ran a hand through her hair. "So what do we do then? Wait until they do something worse?" Alicia didn't answer. She looked down at Buddy, who was watching her with sharp, intelligent eyes. The men had underestimated him once before, and she could feel it in her gut. They would do it again. For now, she would wait. She would plan, and when the time came, she would be ready. The rest of the day passed quietly, but Alicia couldn't shake the feeling that the storm hadn't passed. She spent the evening helping Mia cook dinner, trying to lose herself in the comforting smell of roasted chicken and garlic. But even as they sat at the table, chatting about anything but the threats looming over her, Alicia felt the weight of unseen eyes. After dinner, Mia leaned back in her chair and looked at Alicia seriously. "What's your next move?" Alicia swallowed a sip of water, her gaze steady. "I'm not going to let them win. They think they can scare me, but they picked the wrong person. I'll fight back, Mia, whatever it takes." Mia nodded slowly. "Just promise me you'll be careful. Whatever you're planning, don't take risks you can't come back from." Alicia smiled faintly. "I have Buddy. I'm never alone." As if he understood, Buddy lifted his head from where he lay near the table and barked softly, his tail thumping against the floor. Mia laughed, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good, because you're going to need him." That night, as Alicia lay in Mia's guest room, staring at the ceiling, her mind spun with possibilities. She couldn't go back to her apartment, not yet. But she couldn't keep running either. These men were determined to make her life a living hell, and she refused to let them win. In the quiet dark, Buddy shifted on the floor beside her, his presence steady and grounding. Alicia reached down, brushing her fingers through his fur. "They don't know who they're dealing with," she whispered. "We'll show them." Buddy let out a low, contented rumble in response, and Alicia closed her eyes, the seeds of a plan taking root. The morning broke gray and damp, the city veiled under an oppressive layer of fog. Mia's brownstone, usually a place of warmth and calm, now felt like a refuge under siege. Alicia hadn't slept much, her ears tuned to every creak and groan of the old house. Buddy lay curled near the door, ever vigilant, the occasional twitch of his ears a reminder that even in sleep he was on guard. When Alicia finally rolled out of bed, the clock read 6:15 a.m. She padded into the kitchen, where Mia was already making coffee, her face set in lines of quiet determination. "Morning," Alicia mumbled. "Morning," Mia said softly, sliding a steaming mug across the counter. "You look terrible." Alicia huffed a dry laugh. "I feel worse." She took a sip, letting the heat settle in her chest. Thanks for letting us stay here. Mia waved her off. You're not leaving until we figure this out. I mean it. She hesitated before adding, Any plans for today? Alicia stared into her coffee. The truth was, she didn't know what to do. She couldn't hide in Mia's house forever, and she couldn't go back to her apartment with those men lurking around. The police felt like a wasted effort. Every option felt like a dead end. I don't know, Alicia admitted, but I need to go back to my place at some point. I can't just leave everything behind. Mia frowned. Alicia, before she could finish, a sharp bark from Buddy broke the stillness. Alicia stiffened, her heart jumping into her throat. Buddy was on his feet, his body rigid as he stared at the window near the front door. What is it, boy? Alicia whispered, setting down her mug. Mia grabbed her phone and moved cautiously toward the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to peek outside. Her face went pale. Alicia, she said, her voice low and urgent. They're here. Alicia's stomach dropped. What? Mia stepped back, her breathing shallow. The black pickup truck. It's parked across the street. Alicia didn't need to look to know Mia was right. The familiar feeling of being hunted crept up her spine like icy fingers. She felt trapped, cornered in a house that suddenly felt far too small. This is insane, Mia whispered. How did they even find you here? Alicia's mind raced. Had they followed her from her apartment? Or were they simply watching, waiting for her to slip up? She crouched beside Buddy, running a hand over his back to calm herself as much as him. His muscles were coiled, ready to move at her command. They're not coming in here, Alicia said quietly. I won't let them. What are you going to do, Alicia? Mia hissed, panic flickering across her face. Call the police, now. Alicia hesitated. She wanted to believe the police could help, but deep down, a darker part of her knew how this would go. They'd take their time. They'd brush her off. By the time anyone showed up, the men would be gone, leaving nothing but their silent threats behind. No, Alicia said finally. I'm handling this my way. Mia's eyes widened. Alicia! A sharp knock at the front door cut her off. The sound reverberated through the house, each pound heavier than the last. Buddy let out a low growl, his ears pinned back as he turned toward the door, his body like a drawn bowstring. The knock came again, louder. Alicia stood, her pulse roaring in her ears. Stay here, she said to Mia, who looked ready to argue. Just trust me. She moved toward the door slowly, every step deliberate. Buddy walked beside her, his head low, his gaze locked on the barrier between them and whoever waited on the other side. Alicia's hand hovered over the doorknob. Who is it? She called, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. No response. I said, Who's there? Still nothing. Just silence. Alicia glanced at Buddy, whose teeth were bared now, his growl deepening. She didn't need to see to know that whoever was out there wasn't here to talk. She stepped back and whispered, Buddy, guard. The command was all he needed. Buddy lunged toward the door, barking with an intensity that sent chills down Alicia's spine. The sound was primal, violent, enough to give anyone on the other side second thoughts. She heard shuffling footsteps retreat down the steps, and then silence. Alicia stood frozen, listening. After a moment, she crept toward the window and peered through the curtain. The pickup truck was still there, its engine running, but the men were nowhere in sight. And then, slowly, the truck began to roll forward. Alicia watched it disappear down the street, the taillights glowing red like the eyes of a predator retreating into the darkness. She let out a shaky breath and leaned against the wall, her legs suddenly weak. Buddy returned to her side, pressing his head against her hand, as if to say, We did it. I'm here. Mia appeared in the hallway, her face pale. Are they gone? For now, Alicia murmured. But they'll be back. I know it. Mia shook her head. fury flickering across her face. "This is insane, Alicia. You can't keep playing cat and mouse with these people. What are you going to do?" Alicia met her gaze, the fear in her chest hardening into something sharper. "I'm going to end this." Mia's eyes narrowed. "How?" Alicia looked down at Buddy, who sat quietly now, his gaze steady and loyal. "I don't know yet, but I'm done being afraid." For the rest of the day, Alicia didn't leave the house. She stayed close to Buddy, her mind spinning with possibilities. She couldn't fight these men on their terms, not directly, but they had underestimated her before. And Buddy. She thought back to that night in the alley, the way Buddy had moved, so fast and fierce, like a force of nature. He was her greatest weapon, and they had no idea. By nightfall, Alicia had a plan. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't without risk, but she couldn't keep waiting for them to make the next move. She would take the fight to them. As she sat on the couch, scratching Buddy behind the ears, she whispered, "We're not running anymore, boy. It's time they learned who they're dealing with." Buddy looked up at her, his tail wagging faintly, as if he understood. Outside, the night pressed against the windows like a silent enemy, but Alicia no longer felt helpless. The fear was still there, coiled deep inside her, but now it shared space with something else. Resolve. The men had underestimated her, and by the time this was over, they would regret it. The night passed slowly, every sound amplified in the stillness of Mia's brownstone. Alicia lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Buddy curled near her feet like a silent guardian. The black pickup truck was a ghost in her mind, its taillights glowing like an omen she couldn't shake. She turned onto her side, replaying the threat, the knocks at the door, and the note left beneath her feet. This is just the beginning. Alicia gritted her teeth. No more. She sat up in bed and glanced at the time, 4:17 a.m. There was no point in pretending to sleep. Slipping out from under the covers, she pulled on jeans, a sweater, and her boots. The quiet creak of the floorboards didn't stir Buddy, but the moment she grabbed his leash, his head lifted, ears perked. "Come on, boy," she whispered. "We've got work to do." Mia's house was still, the faint hum of the refrigerator the only noise. Alicia scrawled a quick note, went for a walk with Buddy, "Don't worry," and placed it on the counter. She couldn't tell Mia what she had planned. Not yet. Her friend wouldn't understand. Outside, the city was cloaked in early morning fog, the air crisp and clean. Alicia moved quickly down the steps, Buddy trotting beside her with his usual quiet determination. The streets were empty, the lamplight streaking through the haze. Alicia's heart pounded with adrenaline as she walked. For days these men had followed her, taunted her, hunted her. They had driven her from her home and turned her life upside down. But what they didn't understand, what they couldn't understand, was that Alicia Monroe wasn't someone who could be broken. And now, she was hunting them. By the time the sun began to rise, Alicia had made her way across town to her apartment building. She stayed half hidden behind a bus stop, surveying the area. The black pickup truck wasn't there, but she knew better than to think they were gone for good. It was only a matter of time before they came back. She tightened her grip on Buddy's leash and took a deep breath. "Let's do this." Moving quickly, Alicia entered the building and climbed the back stairs to her apartment, her duffel bag still slung over her shoulder. The place felt different now, tainted by their presence. Her fingers trembled as she locked the door behind her and scanned the room. Nothing seemed out of place, but it didn't matter. She was here for a reason. She pulled open a drawer in her kitchen, shoving utensils aside until she found what she was looking for. A small, handheld camcorder she used to record her art projects. It wasn't fancy, but it worked. Alicia had a plan, and the first step was documentation. If the police wouldn't take her seriously without evidence, then she'd give them evidence they couldn't ignore. She set up the camcorder in her living room window, pointed it directly at the street below. The angle was perfect. It would capture anyone parked outside or loitering near the building. She grabbed a second camera from her bedroom, one she had used for photography, and set it near her door. If they came knocking again, she'd have footage of their faces. With the cameras in place, Alicia sat on her couch, Buddy resting at her feet. She pulled her phone from her pocket and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. After 3 rings, a man's voice answered. "Alicia?" "Hi, Uncle Vic," she said quietly, her voice cracking despite herself. Victor Monroe, her father's brother, had once been a police officer. He had retired years ago after an injury forced him off the force, but his sense of justice never dulled. Growing up, he had been a steady presence, teaching Alicia how to stand tall, how to fight back when life tried to knock her down. "Alicia, it's early," he said, concern softening his tone. "Is everything okay?" "No," she admitted. "I need your help." "What's going on?" Alicia took a deep breath, forcing herself to speak the words aloud. "Some men have been following me, threatening me. They came to my apartment, they left a note, and now they're watching Mia's house. They're not stopping, Uncle Vic. I don't know what to do." The line was quiet for a long moment, and when Victor spoke again, his voice was calm and steady. "Where are you now?" "I'm at my apartment, but I'm not staying here. I needed to come back to set up cameras to catch them if they come back." "You did the right thing," Victor said, "but you need to get somewhere safe, Alicia. I don't like that you're alone." "I'm not alone," she said softly, glancing at Buddy. "Good. Listen to me carefully," Victor continued, his voice firm. "Don't engage with them. Don't let them see you. If you can get footage, great. But your safety comes first. Do you understand me?" "Yes." "I'll make some calls," Victor said. "I still know a few people in the department who can help. Send me everything you have. License plates, descriptions, anything." "Thank you, Uncle Vic." "You don't have to thank me. Just promise me you'll be careful." "I will," she whispered. After hanging up, Alicia felt a small weight lift from her shoulders. Uncle Vic wouldn't let this slide. If anyone could help her navigate this mess, it was him. By midday, Alicia had returned to Mia's house. The black pickup truck hadn't shown up again, but Alicia knew better than to let her guard down. Buddy seemed to sense her mood. He stayed close to her, every muscle taut, every movement alert. In Mia's kitchen, Alicia spread out her notes, descriptions of the men, timelines, everything she could remember about their encounters. Mia hovered nearby, watching her carefully. "You really think the cameras will work?" Mia asked. "They have to," Alicia replied, her jaw tight. "If I can get their faces on video, then the police can't ignore it." Mia folded her arms, her brow furrowed. "And what if they don't stop? What if they don't care about getting caught?" Alicia looked at her, her eyes cold and clear. "Then I'll make them stop." Mia didn't argue. She knew Alicia well enough to understand the steel in her voice. That evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Alicia sat on Mia's couch with Buddy curled at her feet. Her phone buzzed. It was Uncle Vic. "I ran the plate you sent me," he said. "The truck is registered to a man named Hank Fowler, known troublemaker. He runs with a group of guys, petty criminals mostly, but dangerous when they want to be." "Why me?" Alicia asked, her voice shaking. "What did I do to them?" "Sometimes you don't have to do anything," Victor replied. "They picked you because they thought you were an easy target. You scared them when you fought back. Men like that don't take well to being humiliated." Alicia's hand tightened on the phone. "Then I'll humiliate them again." Victor sighed. "Just stay safe. I'll keep digging." As the call ended, Alicia sat back, her pulse steady despite the fear curling in her stomach. She looked down at Buddy, who met her gaze with quiet loyalty. "This isn't over," she whispered. "But we're ready for them, aren't we, boy?" Buddy let out a soft bark, his tail wagging faintly. The trap was set, and this time, Alicia wasn't the prey. The night outside Mia's brownstone was thick with tension. Alicia sat in the dimly lit living room, her laptop open in front of her, eyes scanning the footage she'd captured earlier that day from the cameras in her apartment. Buddy rested beside her, his breathing soft and steady, though his ears twitched at the slightest sound. Alicia's pulse quickened every time the screen flickered, every time a shadow crossed the street. She rewound, zoomed, and replayed sections obsessively, convinced she was missing something. And then, there it was. Movement. A black pickup truck slid into view on the far edge of the footage, creeping down her street like a predator stalking prey. The license plate was clear, matching the one Uncle Vic had traced back to Hank Fowler. The truck idled for a while before two men stepped out, their faces partially obscured by baseball caps. One of them, the leader from that night in the alley, looked straight up at her window as if daring her to respond. A chill ran through her. "They don't even care if I see them," she whispered. Buddy stirred at the sound of her voice, his head lifting to meet her gaze. Alicia gently rubbed his ears, her thoughts spinning. These men weren't going to stop. Hank and his friends were escalating, testing her resolve, hoping to break her spirit. But Alicia wasn't about to break. They had miscalculated. The soft creak of footsteps pulled her attention to the kitchen doorway, where Mia appeared, dressed in her robe, her hair tied up messily. "You're still up," she said, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "I can't sleep," Alicia replied, gesturing to the footage. "I've been watching them. They keep coming back to my apartment, like they're waiting for me to slip up." Mia crossed her arms, leaning against the doorway. "This is insane. You can't keep living like this. I know you're determined, but it's dangerous, Alicia. You can't fight these men alone." "I'm not alone," Alicia said quietly, glancing at Buddy. Mia sighed and walked over, lowering herself onto the couch beside Alicia. "I get it, okay? You're strong. You don't want to let them win. But what if this plan of yours, this whole set a trap thing, goes wrong? What happens then?" Alicia's jaw tightened as she stared at the paused frame of Hank Fowler on her screen. "Then I make them regret ever crossing me." Mia shook her head, frustration etched into her face. "This isn't you, Alicia. You're not reckless." "I'm not reckless," Alicia snapped, turning to face her. "But I'm not running either. They don't get to take my home, my safety, my peace. Not without a fight." Mia stared at her for a long moment, something flickering in her eyes. Fear, admiration, maybe both. "Then let me help you," she said finally. "Whatever you need." Alicia nodded slowly. "Okay, I need you to cover for me tomorrow night." "Cover for you?" Mia's brow furrowed. "Where are you going?" "I'm going back to my apartment," Alicia said, her voice calm but resolute. "I'm not just going to wait around for them to come find me. I'm going to lure them out." Mia stared at her like she had lost her mind. "You what?" "I'll call Uncle Vic and let him know. He'll have backup nearby if things go south. But I need to draw them in and get enough proof that the police can't ignore it. I need their faces, their words, all of it. And then they'll have no choice but to deal with these men." "Alicia, that's insane." Mia stood abruptly, pacing the living room. "You want to bait them? What if they hurt you? What if Buddy can't protect you this time?" Alicia's eyes softened. "Buddy isn't just a dog, Mia. He's trained. He knows what to do." She glanced down at him, his eyes locked on her, as if he understood every word. "And I trust him with my life." Mia ran a hand through her hair, exhaling shakily. "I don't like this. I really don't." "You don't have to like it," Alicia said gently. "But I need you to trust me." Mia's shoulders sagged, her face etched with worry. "Fine. But promise me you'll call Vic the second you get there. And if anything feels off, anything, you'll get out." "I promise," Alicia said softly. The following evening, Alicia stood in the darkened entryway of her apartment building, her hand clutching Buddy's leash like a lifeline. The air was heavy, her breath clouding in front of her as she exhaled slowly. It felt surreal to be back here, standing in the place where everything had begun to unravel. She glanced down at Buddy, his gaze sharp and focused. "Ready, boy?" Buddy's tail wagged once, his body tense and prepared. Alicia pushed the door open quietly and moved up the stairs to her apartment. The hallway was eerily silent, the kind of quiet that felt unnatural in a city that never slept. When she reached her door, she slid inside quickly, locking it behind her. The apartment was cold and still, exactly as she had left it. Alicia crossed the room, pulling the curtains closed before switching on the cameras she'd set up. She checked her phone. Uncle Vic was on standby, just a block away. Backup would come if she needed it. But Alicia wasn't planning on needing it. She sat on the couch, her hands curled into fists on her knees, her mind steady and clear. Hours passed, the room growing darker as the last light of day faded. Alicia didn't move. She waited, and Buddy waited with her, his body like a coiled spring. And then, just after midnight, it happened. The sound of tires crunching on gravel echoed up from the street. Alicia's pulse quickened, her ears straining to hear. She crept to the window and pulled back the curtain just an inch. The black pickup truck. It idled on the curb, its engine rumbling low and menacing. Alicia's breath caught as two figures stepped out. Hank Fowler and another man. Hank looked up at her window, his face illuminated briefly by the streetlight, his expression smug and cruel. Alicia's heart thundered, but her resolve held. Let them come, she thought. A sharp knock rattled her door moments later, and Buddy growled low in his throat, his hackles raised. Alicia crouched beside him, placing a hand on his back to steady them both. "Showtime," she whispered. From the other side of the door came Hank's voice, dripping with mock politeness. "Hey, sweetheart. Thought we'd stop by and check in on you." Alicia reached for her phone, her thumb hovering over Vic's number. She knew this moment was the turning point. One wrong move, and everything could fall apart. "I'm not afraid of you," she called through the door, her voice steady. Hank's laughter echoed in the hallway. "Oh, you should be." Buddy let out a sharp bark, the sound like a warning shot in the confined space. "Buddy," Alicia whispered. "Hold." The sound outside shifted, footsteps moving, men talking in low tones. Alicia's finger hovered over the dial button, but something in her gut told her to wait. Just a little longer? Come on, she thought, just a little more. And then, through the peephole, she saw Hank pull something from his pocket, a crowbar. Her breath caught, her heartbeat a roar in her ears. It was time. She pressed the call button, her voice steady as Uncle Vic's voice came through the line. "They're here." "On my way," Vic replied. Alicia looked down at Buddy, who stared back at her, ready. She took a deep breath and whispered, "Let's finish this." The trap was sprung, and this time, Alicia wouldn't be the one to lose. The air in the apartment felt electric, charged with the weight of what was about to happen. Alicia's hand stayed steady on Buddy's back as she crouched near the door, listening to the muffled voices just outside. Hank's smug tone echoed through the thin wood. "You can make this easy, sweetheart," he drawled, the crowbar clinking against the door handle. "Or you can make it hard. Either way, we're coming in." Alicia tightened her grip on her phone, Vic's voice faintly audible in her ear. "I'm almost there, Alicia. Stay calm. Don't engage!" Buddy's growl rumbled low, vibrating against her palm, his body a taut line of muscle and fury. Alicia's pulse roared in her ears, but her mind was sharper than it had ever been. "You're not the prey," she told herself. "You're the fight they didn't see coming." The next moment, the handle jerked violently. Metal scraped against metal as Hank and his accomplice worked the crowbar into the lock. Alicia had seconds to decide her next move. She glanced at Buddy. "Ready, boy?" The dog's ears perked, his deep brown eyes locking on her face as if to say, "Always." The door splintered with a sharp crack, the wood splintering inward just enough for Hank's hand to reach through and unlock it. The click of the deadbolt reverberated through the apartment like a gunshot. They were inside. The door flew open, and Hank stepped through, his face twisted into a smug grin that faltered when he saw what awaited him. Alicia stood just a few feet back, her posture straight, her chin lifted. Beside her, Buddy stood rigid, his teeth bared in a snarl that echoed through the room. "Leave," Alicia said, her voice cold. "You don't want this fight." Hank scoffed, the crowbar dangling loosely in his grip as his companion, a wiry man with a scar across his cheek, stepped in behind him. "You're all bark, sweetheart," Hank sneered, his eyes flicking to Buddy. "And this mutt? He's not scaring anyone." Alicia smiled faintly, her gaze never wavering. "You're underestimating him again." Hank took a step forward. That's when Alicia whispered the word Buddy had been waiting for. "Guard!" Buddy launched forward like a bolt of lightning, his snarl turning into a full-blown roar of fury. He barreled into Hank, the crowbar clattering to the floor as the man's breath exploded from his chest. Hank stumbled back, crashing into the wall, Buddy's teeth sinking into his arm just enough to pin him in place. "Get him off me!" Hank screamed, his voice breaking as panic finally shattered through his bravado. The second man hesitated for a heartbeat too long, his face pale as Buddy growled and snapped, keeping Hank immobile. Alicia turned to him, her voice sharp. "You take one more step, and you'll wish you hadn't." The man's eyes darted to Hank, then back to Alicia. He clearly hadn't expected this. Whatever they thought they'd find, some scared, helpless woman, wasn't here. Alicia stood tall, and Buddy was a wall of fury and precision. From outside, the distant screech of tires grew louder, followed by slamming car doors. Uncle Vic. "Buddy, hold!" Alicia called. Buddy obeyed immediately, his teeth releasing Hank's arm, though he stayed in front of the man, his growl low and constant. A warning. Hank slid down the wall, clutching his bleeding arm, his face pale with shock and pain. The second man took a step back toward the door, hands raised. "We didn't mean—" "Shut up!" Alicia snapped, her voice cutting like ice. "You meant every word, every threat. You thought you could scare me, that you could win. You picked the wrong woman." Suddenly, the front door flew open. Victor Monroe stepped inside, his tall frame filling the doorway. Though retired, his presence was commanding. His sharp eyes scanned the scene, locking onto Hank and the second man. Two uniformed officers followed behind him, guns drawn. "Freeze!" one of the officers barked. The second man dropped to his knees, hands in the air. Hank, still cradling his arm, glared at Alicia, hatred burning in his eyes. "This ain't over," he spat. Uncle Vic crossed the room in 2 strides, crouching beside Hank and yanking his injured arm just enough to make the man wince. "Oh, it's over," Vic growled, his voice low and lethal. "You're done. Assault, breaking and entering, stalking. I'll make sure you don't see daylight for a long time." Hank's sneer faltered as Vic leaned closer. "And let me be clear, if you ever so much as think about coming near my niece again, you won't have to worry about the law. You'll worry about me." Alicia watched as the officers hauled the 2 men to their feet, handcuffing them before leading them out of the apartment. Hank shot her one last venomous glare, but Alicia didn't flinch. She didn't look away. "Bye, Hank," she said softly. The door closed behind them, and silence fell over the room. Alicia exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of days of fear and tension finally lift from her shoulders. Uncle Vic turned to her, his face softening. "You okay, kid?" Alicia nodded, tears stinging her eyes as she crouched beside Buddy, wrapping her arms around him. The German shepherd leaned into her, his body solid and warm, his tail wagging softly. "You did good, boy," she whispered, pressing her forehead against his. "You saved me." Uncle Vic watched them for a moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "You're brave, Alicia, but don't scare me like that again." She smiled faintly, wiping her eyes. I had Buddy. I wasn't alone. Vic knelt beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. You've got me too, always. The days that followed felt like a blur. Hank Fowler and his accomplices were charged and denied bail, the evidence from Alicia's cameras sealing their fate. For the first time in weeks, Alicia felt like she could breathe again. She returned to her apartment with Buddy by her side. The space still held echoes of what had happened, but it was hers again, her home. She spent hours cleaning, scrubbing away the stains of fear, reclaiming every inch of her life. One afternoon, Mia stopped by with coffee and donuts, collapsing onto the couch with a dramatic sigh. So, you're officially the toughest person I know. Alicia laughed softly, scratching Buddy's ears as he lay beside her. I couldn't have done it without him. Mia smiled. You two are a team. I hope you know that. I do, Alicia said quietly, looking down at Buddy. He's not just my dog, he's my protector, my family. Buddy let out a contented sigh, his tail thumping softly against the floor. As the sun streamed through the windows, Alicia leaned back on the couch, her heart finally at ease. The men who had tried to terrorize her were gone, their threats turned to dust. They had underestimated her strength, her resolve, and the unwavering loyalty of the dog by her side. And they had learned a lesson they wouldn't forget. Alicia smiled, running her hand through Buddy's fur as she whispered, We did it, boy. It's finally over. Buddy's tail wagged, and for the first time in weeks, Alicia felt truly safe.